The Ross Kaminsky Show.
You're a great American.
Now, Ross Kaminsky.
Come on, man.
On Denver's talk station, 630 KHOW.
All right, good morning. It's Tuesday. I'm Ross. Thanks for being here. We have a remarkable show for you today, I think, and I don't say that about every show. One quick thing before we bring my very special guest on. I would just like to note the passing of veteran Arvada police officer Gordon Beasley, who was shot and killed yesterday. From everybody here at KHOW, our thoughts are with the family and friends of Officer Beasley. He was a school resource officer at Oberon Middle School. He was working patrol during the summer while school was out, and he was shot and killed yesterday. We don't have all the details of the event. We know that the shooter was also killed, and we also know that a civilian who is being described, not named, but being described as a good Samaritan was also killed. It could have been somebody who tried to intervene to stop the shooter, but I just thought it would be most appropriate, given this story, to start the show by mentioning Officer Gordon Beasley. Rest in peace. All right. I read this book yesterday. It's called Facing Reality: Two Truths About Race in America by Dr. Charles Murray, who is one of the most interesting public intellectuals and political scientists in America, and actually has been for many years. Let me just do one thing at the risk of having Charles wait slightly longer than I want him to. As you know, I'm president of the Bad Analogy Club. I want to just, before we get into this conversation, I want to give just a quick analogy. Imagine a book about the data underlying climate change. I pick climate change because it's an issue that has become very emotional and almost taken on a religious kind of nature in American political conversation. But imagine there's a book that isn't about we should do this and we should do that, but rather here are the data series about the things you need to know if you are going to make policy regarding climate change. And maybe the data comes out in a way that is going to cause one side to be particularly upset. As an example, maybe the data would come out in a way that shows that climate isn't changing very much, and then a lot of people who have made that not just their issue, but almost their religion will be very upset. But the author says, look, I'm not proposing policies here. I am just showing you the data so that when people go to make policies that will affect perhaps not just every American, but maybe the world, and maybe for a very long time, and maybe in ways that are quite harmful if we get it wrong, you should at least know what the data is. That's my analogy to what Dr. Charles Murray is doing in Facing Reality, but not about climate change, on a couple of other key issues. Dr. Murray, thanks so much for being here. It's been much too long since we've spoken. I really appreciate your time.
I'm glad to be there. And by the way, I think that the way you introduced this is just right. I mean, you described exactly what I'm trying to do with race. We should not get it wrong, and we are getting it wrong right now.
Yes. So let's start off with one obvious thing, and then we're going to dig into the data. You are no stranger to controversy. I think you have a fairly thick skin about it. Last time that I tried to get you on the show, it ended up being right at the time that those morons up at the college in New England decided they didn't want you to speak, and you just said, I'm just going to stay away from the media for a little while, which I get. So you've been through this before, but of all the things that you've ever written, even though this is really just data, what do you expect the reaction to be, and what has it been so far?
Okay, Ross. Well, I guess that we're keeping our listeners in suspense as to what's behind the screen here.
Yes, and just for a moment.
I'll just quickly say that the two issues that I take up are differences in violent crime across different races and differences in cognitive ability, both of which are third rails of various sorts. Okay, now that I've said that, the question was what, Ross? I just forgot.
The question is, did you care?
What did I expect?
Yeah, what did you expect? And did it even matter? Because, you're just presenting data. So did you even really care what the reaction would be in that sense?
Well, I care in the sense that, my family was not thrilled that I said I had to write this book. It could go all the way from no reaction at all, because I wrote a book called Human Diversity that came out last year. Nobody paid any attention to it at all, and it was filled with heretical stuff. It could go from there to the firestorm kind of reaction that the bell curve got. So far, I am in the first all is roses and light phase of reaction to the book. It only came out last week. And so I have been on a number of shows like yours, and did an interview with Tucker Carlson and all of it, and Glenn Lowry. And all of this has been very civil, thoughtful, and productive. But I'm assuming that sooner or later there's going to be some pretty nasty stuff coming down the road. However, I'm 78, all right? And here's just the fact. 35-year-old assistant professor who wants to have a career could not write this book because he would never get tenure, would probably be fired from his current post. So take advantage of the fact that you are kind of immune to a lot of the cancel culture, and it made sense for me to write it.
Right. And I should have said this to begin with for folks who don't know you. At this point in your career, Dr. Murray is the F.A. Hayek Emeritus Chair in Cultural Studies at the American Enterprise Institute, AEI. He's got his undergrad from Harvard, his Ph.D. in political science from MIT. So, boy, there is so much to go through. By the way, I did read the entire book yesterday. So,
Thank you.
One of the things that you talk about early in the book, just a little before getting into the actual numbers, is that Americans probably don't really understand the racial structure of the United States of America. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, if you ask, Gallup poll asks, what's your estimate of the percentage of population that's Latino or percentage that's black? The answers that come back average around 30% each, which are way too high. The blacks constitute 12.7% of the population last year, and Latinos were about 19%. So we start with a lot of misconceptions in that sense. And a second misconception is this narrative that says, well, the United States is going to be a majority-minority country by 2050. 2050, which it is. Non-Latino whites will be a minority, but the narrative goes, well, we've got to get used to that because that's the way it's going to be throughout the entire country. And in fact, the country is really weirdly skewed in the way that races fall out. So you have large parts of the country now that are essentially as white as they were in 1960, with about 85% non-Latino whites. You've got other parts of the country where the majority of the population are Latinos. You've got some zip codes that are majority black. And in the large cities, of course, there are big racial minorities. What all I'm saying to my readers is, no, it's not going to play the same all over the country. There are going to be very different stories unfolding over the next couple of decades. And incidentally, and I didn't dwell on this in the book, that very difference in the way the population is spread out can feed into a lot of the negatives that we have to worry about right now.
Right, and your graphical depiction of this in the book is really, well, you know how a picture tells it is better than 1,000 words, right? So, you've got sort of the old South, where the color coding shows that there are either majority or large minority black. You've got the Southwest, where you've got in California, similar kind of thing with Latino, and then most of the country, as you describe, as European ancestry, non-Latino white. I found the point very interesting, and I'm still pondering just what it means in terms of public policy, that most places that have a high percentage of a quote-unquote minority don't necessarily have high percentages of more than one minority. A few places do, but mostly places that have a lot of blacks don't have a lot of Latinos, and vice versa, right?
That's true outside the big cities. And another point I try to make there is there are really two Americas, in my opinion. I think the real dividing line in the United States isn't directly political and isn't directly racial. Rather, it's the difference in daily life in the megalopolises versus small town and small city America.
Absolutely.
And my point is, look, some people live in an America where the idea of walking out the door and leaving your door unlocked during the course of the day is just idiotic, and where you have all sorts of, getting a plumber, getting an electrician to come fix something is a very different problem than it is in a small town or a small city.
Mm-hmm.
From big things to little things, life is just way different, and that is reflected, I think, as well in politics eventually, because in a lot of the country where you have, well, call it the red states if you want to, where people still believe we should have less government influence, it's in places where you don't need government control because local institutions still work pretty well. The big cities, you've got a very different set of problems to deal with. So
yeah.
You've got two different worlds.
I couldn't agree with you more. And obviously, you and I aren't the only people who have said that the key divide in America is essentially urban-rural, but I definitely believe it's true. Let's get to Chapter 3 in your book, which, among the many controversial things you've written in your esteemed career, this is going to be one of the most controversial, assuming we get to the point, like you talked about, where a lot of people start paying attention. And the title of the chapter is Race Differences in Cognitive Ability. So let's do two things real quick. Number one, what exactly does cognitive ability mean, and how is it measured? And then what are the results? What do the data show?
Let me put this as simply as I can. Let's not worry about can you capture intelligence with a single number. Let's not worry about the theory. Here are a couple of bedrock facts that can't be disputed. A mental test, whether it's an IQ test or whether it's a test of reading and writing ability and math ability, show different scores for different races. All right, with Asians on top, and then whites, and then Latinos, and then blacks at the lower end. Those differences in mental test scores are predictive of important outcomes. Predictive in the sense that if you give me 1,000 kids who are, I'm trying to avoid jargon here, but who are substantially higher in their mean on those mental tests than another group, you will see that 1,000 kids do better in classrooms. If you get 1,000 people applying for the job of K-12 teacher, and one of those groups has substantially higher scores on these tests than another, it will be predictive of the quality of their teaching ability. Mm-hmm. And it's in that predictiveness. You can complain all you want to, and someone can complain all they want to about why those scores are different. Okay, fine. We can argue about that another time. What the book says, the difference exists right now in 2021, has existed for a long time, is predictive of important outcomes in the classroom and on the job. And if you don't take that into account, you are going to misunderstand the reasons why we observe such things as, for example, there are very few blacks in senior positions at Google and Microsoft. That is not necessarily racist behavior. In fact, Google and Microsoft yearn for more senior managers who are black. It's a reflection of what the marketplace is like, the job marketplace is like. So I'm trying to avoid as many of the emotion-laden aspects of this issue as I can and focus people's attention on you got to deal with reality as it exists right now. And that's hence the title of the book.
So my listeners know that when I do interviews, I'm usually streaming to Facebook at the time, and we are right now. We got your voice and my picture, but I just held up to the camera the page 34 with a chart, European African difference in mental test scores expressed in standard deviations, and this is data that goes from the 1970s through now. And it shows that in the beginning of the data series, I guess what you'd call non-Latino white Americans, you use the term European in your book, had a much, much higher average score on IQ tests or similar tests. That difference declined pretty substantially into the late 1980s and then has stopped declining since, with a persistent gap between what you call European and African populations in America. And
it's that persistence which I think we ought to focus on. If we were looking at a continuing steady decline, that would pose a very different situation than if it's been static for 30 years now.
Mm-hmm. Right. So I think one question that's going to come out of this that you don't address, or at least you don't address much in the book, to the extent that there is an ongoing, persistent gap where whites show higher IQs than blacks, higher but not as much higher than Latinos, lower than Asians. Do you believe, and again, I want to stipulate this is not where Charles goes in the book. I'm just asking this question. Do you believe you will find an explanation in culture or in genetics or in societal structures or in some balance of all of them? I guess the genetic one is the most controversial question.
Okay. First, I'm going to preface this with something I want to get out every time I talk about this book. Folks, a difference in means does not say that you can sort races into different bins.
Right.
Millions of blacks are smarter than millions of whites.
Mm-hmm.
Don't ever forget that. And there are flat out, absolutely brilliant blacks and Latinos, as well as Asians and whites. And there are some really dumb whites as well. I'm trying to tell you, you're talking about overlapping distributions. This need not be scary.
Right. And let me just interject here for just 1 second, Charles. So my background is in financial markets trading, where it's all about not being misled by data and really understanding what data is saying and what it's not saying. And I spend a lot of time on this show talking to my listeners about data abuse and things like the guy whose head is in the oven and feet are in the freezer, but on average he's fine, so he gets reported as fine, right? And just little things like that. So I do think your caveat is well taken and important. So with that, though,
I'll come to your question, though.
Yeah.
Are we going to find out what the causes are? Yes, we are going to find out. We already know quite a bit, but we are going to find out within the next decade pretty conclusively, because progress in genetics is so rapid. It doesn't get reported very much, but it's so rapid that a lot of questions are going to be answered. Can I say, and I want you to italicize and put exclamation points after this, doesn't make any difference what the results is. My guess is the explanation of the gap will be partly environmental, partly genetic, all right? But when I say it doesn't make any difference, Ross, this is what I mean. We have, over the last 30 years, that the numbers have been stagnant, thrown hundreds of billions of dollars at the education system, saying if only we get better education for all Americans, that this will go away. It's not, No Child Left Behind just convulsed the school system in an explicit effort to close the test score gap.
Mm-hmm.
Do it.
Mm-hmm.
The Gates Foundation poured huge amounts of money and into innovative educational programs that were going to close the gap. And they admitted defeat after spending billions and billions of very carefully targeted money.
Mm-hmm.
If that is the case, I can still make an argument that it's environmental. That set of results doesn't say definitively you've got a genetic gap. What it does tell you is we don't have any bright ideas out there that we haven't tried. So
Right.
Don't say, it's going to go away if we lower the poverty rate or if we improve the schools or this and that. Yeah, this thing. We've been trying for a long time. So let's live with what we got and don't obsess about causes. We'll know soon enough, but it doesn't really make much difference from a public policy perspective.
My special guest, Dr. Charles Murray from the American Enterprise Institute. His new book is called Facing Reality, 2 Truths About Race in America. Gosh, I wish I had you for 2 hours, but I've only got you for another couple of minutes. Let's talk about the other major subject in your book, the difference in rates of commission of serious crime among races. I'll let you take it where you want to.
Sure. And I focus on violent crime, which is rape, robbery, murder, and aggravated assault. And I was able to obtain the complete arrest records from 13 cities, including New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Washington, D.C., big cities, for the last several years. And by the way, these are publicly available. Anybody can download these and do the same thing I did if they're willing to spend a lot of time. And the ratios of violent arrests for blacks and for whites they're hugely different. In New York City, it's 11.6 to 1. In Los Angeles, it's 9 to 1. In Chicago, it's 14.5 to 1. And what this means, well, by the way, I also spend a lot of time saying, well, can you interpret arrest data as actually reflecting criminal behavior?
Mm-hmm.
And I go through a lot of triangulation of the data, and the answer is you can interpret it. But here's the point in terms of current issues about policing in black neighborhoods. It's fine if you want to say that the cops are racist, and go ahead, and when you see evidence of that, or when you see a video of a police officer firing at an unarmed person who is walking away from him, that is a criminal act that deserves to be fully prosecuted. But those things go viral. What people have to remember is that when a professional, responsible police officer goes into a low-income urban black neighborhood in the United States, he or she is operating in a dangerous environment, a much more dangerous environment than a white affluent suburb. And good policing suggests that you take different kinds of precautions and different kinds of measures in a more dangerous environment. And a great deal of what we see is not racism in policing. A great deal of what we see are police doing their damnedest to get it right, oftentimes in the face of provocations, obscenities yelled at them, threats and so forth, which the body cameras would not show police roughing people up. It would show police exhibiting enormous restraint. So before we get too excited about defunding the police, let's step back and look at the environment in which police have to function in minority neighborhoods, especially black minority neighborhoods, and make public policy decisions accordingly.
Dr. Charles Murray's new book is called Facing Reality. It takes on two major topics: racial differences in IQ, but based on the mean, again, not based on what any one individual can be, and also racial differences in crime. And this book is essentially just data. And one of the things I appreciate about the book, Charles, is by not engaging in your own prescriptions as to what to do regarding the results that you find, you leave it for readers. You leave it easier for readers to start thinking about those things themselves and not react to, oh, he's just a conservative who wants to do X. So I think it's very smart of you not to go down the prescriptive road with this book, which doesn't mean you're not going to piss a lot of people off. But I think it's really important that you did what you did, and I'm grateful for your courage. It shouldn't take courage to do this, but it does.
Thank you very much, Ross. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. I've enjoyed it in the past, and today has been one of the most rational discussions of this that I've had.
I'm grateful for your time, and I'm grateful for everything you've done over your career, and I hope to have you back on the show, Doctor.
Thank you.
Thanks. Dr. Charles Murray's new book, Facing Reality, Two Truths About Race in America. We'll be right back.
KHOW Denver, 630 KHOW, an iHeart radio station. Available everywhere on our free iHeart.